So now we are going to talk about if statements and equality operators. First, let's talk about what an if statement is. It's basically a conditional running of code, aka your code will only run if something is true. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves into if statements, I want to go over equality operators. So in Python, there are 6 main equality operators. But what those are they basically check if something is what something is, I guess, in relation to something else. I think that's a little bit of a loose definition, but I'm sure you guys will get a deeper understanding if we dive into some examples. So equality operators, probably the most common, are less than and greater than. They're very common every day. The same goes for less than or equal to, as well as greater than or equal to. Less than or equal to, and greater than or equal to. And finally, we have our main equality operators, which are double equals and exclamation point equals. Now, double equals means just equals. It can't be different than what you're comparing it to in any way. And exclamation point equals to is actually not equals to. So the value of your things can be anything as long as they do not match. So let's try writing an if statement. First things first, let's create some more variables. Let's stick to numerical variables for now. So let's call our first one num-a. We'll set that equal to 10. Then we can also have a num-b and set that equal to 16. Now, let's say we wanted to print a statement out that said num-b is greater than num-a. Well, we can't print that out if num-a is greater than num-b. We can only print that out when num-b is greater than num-a. So we would use an if statement. And the way we use an if statement in Python is by writing the word if and then getting our first variable, so in this case num-b, and then we would use our equality operator. So in this case, let's do if num-b greater than num-a. So now we have our if, we have our condition. So our condition has to evaluate to true or false, which, if you guys remember, is a Boolean. Let me write that down. Condition must evaluate to true or false, a Boolean. Now, because there are only 2 values, an if statement will either run or not run. But this is probably the most important part of an if statement. After you write the if and after you write the condition, you want to add a colon to the end of your line. Let me move this comment up here for clarity. But you want to add a colon, so 2 dots, one on top of the other. And then from that colon, if you hit return, you're going to see that there's this little bit of space over here. Now, a lot of people are tempted to just delete it, but trust me, that space is super, super important because it tells Python what's inside the if statement and what's outside the if statement. A lot of different coding languages have different ways of indicating what's inside and what's outside. Python doesn't. So it's very, very important that you guys always keep this space and always keep it consistent. You can't have a tab up here, and then on the next line, you can't do 1 space. It doesn't work like that. You have to keep your indentation level. And the same goes for anything that's not in an if statement. Let's comment that out. But over here, you guys can see we get an indentation error even if our variable name is just one space from where it's supposed to be. So be very careful with your indentation and spaces in Python. But anyway, back to the if statements. So if num b is greater than num a, we want to print num, I'll just say it like this, num b is greater than num a. And if we run this, you guys are going to see num b is greater than num a, which is great. Now, let's say num b isn't greater than num a. Let's say num b is 1 and num a is 10. If we run that, we're not going to see anything, because since this condition evaluated to false, Python immediately just skipped over it. It doesn't even look at what's inside. And then it would move on to the next line. So let's say we had a different print statement down here that said, all done. It would go directly to all done. It wouldn't say num b is greater. But if we put num b back to being greater, it would print out both, whatever's inside the if statement and whatever's outside. Now, this happens no matter what the equality operator is. It'll always evaluate to true or false. So we can do center equal to, set both of them equal to 10, and it will still say num b is greater than num a because they're still equal to each other, even if it wouldn't if we didn't have that equal sign. And if we had the equals, it would also print out whatever this statement is, even if it's not very accurate in the moment. And if it's not equal to, that's when we won't get it printed out because these two are equal to each other. So that is an overview of if statements in Python and equality operators as well.